and a member opposed. Each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For nearly 2 decades, brave American service members gave their blood, sweat, tears. Many made the ultimate sacrifice to the U.S. mission in Afghanistan, fighting terror and ensuring our national security. In a few short days of abject incompetence from President Biden and his administration, those gains were erased. Now, after 3 long years, the Biden administration is yet to take any accountability for its despicable withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan. I still struggle to grasp the level of abdication of leadership and sheer dereliction of duty that occurred in Afghanistan on that day. To this very day, it should infuriate every single American to see the hateful and terrorizing Taliban regime regain control of Kabul once again, touting our own American weapons, aircraft, and machinery in a mockery of our longstanding fight for the freedom of Afghanistan. While the underlying bill does have a section prohibiting the transport of currency to the Taliban, which I applaud, by the way, this amendment goes further by prohibiting any funding to the Taliban. I mean, truth is actually stranger than fiction. We fought these people for 20 years. In their mind, we surrendered. In the world's mind, we walked out, abandoned the fight that Americans gave their blood, sweat, and tears for, and now we're paying them. This is some kind of clown show, if it weren't so sad. I ask my fellow colleagues to support this amendment, to refuse any kind of support to this hideous regime, especially since the Special Inspector for Afghanistan Reconstruction recently confirmed to the Oversight Committee that he cannot assure that American taxpayer dollars are not going to fund the Taliban. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I claim time in opposition to this amendment and yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong opposition to this amendment. This amendment ties the administration's hands in how it can best support the people of Afghanistan living under Taliban rule. It prohibits the use of any funds authorized via this bill to be used even tangentially to aid in our support of the millions of Afghan women and girls suffering under Taliban rule, or to those Afghans living in poverty and in need of humanitarian relief. The administration already jumps through many hoops to ensure that aid is not moving through Taliban hands. This amendment also removes the president's ability to issue waivers or licenses to allow for humanitarian need. This amendment counters our own interest to prevent humanitarian crises, to assist with detained Americans, and to continue our ongoing work to relocate all those Afghan allies who worked alongside the United States over the course of our 20-year war in Afghanistan. The amendment strives to be tough on the Taliban without any regard for the Afghan people, which will just embolden the Taliban and create further discord and distrust between the United States and Afghanistan. The amendment is a red herring. The boogeyman word in this amendment is the Taliban. What this amendment does is ties the hands of the administration by requiring sanction mitigation to go through Congress. That's the job for the administration. And with the dysfunction of this Congress, you should not even ask us to put toilet paper in the bathroom. This amendment would make that humanitarian aid illegal and people would die. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
I yield the gentlelady from Florida 30 seconds.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Chairman, I couldn't help but pull out my pocket constitution, and I couldn't seem to find anywhere in here where it says we need to fund programs for humanitarian aid for women and children in Afghanistan. So with that, I just wanted to point that out, and I yield my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the text is not in the Constitution, it's in the bill. And with that, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Washington State, Representative Smith.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can't say it any better than my colleague said it, so I will primarily associate myself with her remarks. But the bottom line is we have interest in Afghanistan. She mentioned a lot of the humanitarian interests. There are also national security interests. ISIS is present in Afghanistan. We have considerable concern about what they might do in terms of posing a transnational threat. We've taken strikes against there. There are many conceivable situations where we might need to work with Afghanistan in focusing on this issue, on humanitarian needs, on national security needs. If it requires Congress to do it, it ties the hands of the president to basically be able to implement the policies that we will need to protect our interests. There's no need to have this requirement. I join my colleague in urging a no vote on this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman
I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I remind everybody that this is the National Defense Authorization Act. It has to do with the military. If you want to keep spending money and sending money to Afghanistan, God bless you, then do it in state and foreign ops, do it in intel, do it somewhere other than in the Defense Authorization Act. This is about the defense of our country, about what's important to us and our military, not spending money in Afghanistan that should be spent on troops from the United States. I mean, if you're worried, yes, you absolutely do want to tie the hands of this commander-in-chief. He has absolutely no clue what he's doing. He's the one that walked out of the battle, gave everything to Afghanistan, gave everything to the Taliban, gave premier weaponry to the #1 terrorist organization on the planet. And you want to send them more money? If you want to do that, you can vote for that. But don't do it on the National Defense Authorization Act. People wear the uniform with the flag on their shoulder in defense of this country, in defense of our ideas, not so that you can spend money on whatever, quixotic crusade that you're on in Afghanistan that you already failed at, and now you're trying to make amends for. With that, Mr. Chairman, I reserve.
Reserves. Members are reminded to direct their remarks to the chair. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire as to how much time I have remaining?
The lady has 2.5 minutes remaining.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to yield 45 seconds to the gentleman from Washington State, Representative Smith.
The gentleman is recognized for 45 seconds.
Mr. Chairman, I just be clear. There is no money in the authorizing bill for Afghanistan. So the gentleman's worries are misplaced. In fact, if he wasn't bringing up this amendment, we wouldn't even be talking about it. So that last little bit there was completely wrong, totally confusing. Some big impassioned plea about how dare we pass an authorizing act that funds the Taliban. I want to assure all members there is no money in this bill for funding the Taliban. This amendment's got nothing to do with the authorizing bill. It goes way beyond that. We are not doing what the sponsor of this amendment just said we were doing. I don't know, maybe he wishes to withdraw the amendment at this point since it is pointless to his argument, but I just want to be clear for the members who will have to vote on this. It's not in the bill. This amendment has nothing to do with that. And with that, I yield back.
I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Well, let me speak to that. If there's no funding in here and no authorization for spending any of American tax dollars in Afghanistan, then you certainly won't mind an amendment that does nothing.
The gentleman is not recognized.
Just 5
Does the gentleman yield?
I yield.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman is recognized.
This prohibits the president from funding anything, including all that other stuff. So it goes beyond what's in the bill. You implied that in the bill we're funding this. The executive branch is a different thing. Your amendment would prohibit the administration from doing anything. That's the objection to it.
I don't want, reclaiming my time, I don't want, and I don't think the American people trust this president to spend any of their money in Afghanistan on the Taliban. This is about the Taliban and spending tax dollars. People get up in the morning while it's still dark out. They pack their lunchbox. They don't even see their kids before they go to school, and they go out to work to make a living and pay their taxes. And they dutifully do that. They want to support their country, including the national security of their country. I bet this is what they don't want to do. Spend their hard-earned tax dollars on the Taliban to persecute women and children and not let them go to school and hang up their adversaries on poles and crucify them and all those kind of things. That's what they don't want to pay for, and they don't trust this president to make the right decision because the last time he had the opportunity to do that, he screwed it up. I reserve.
Reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, you know, the last election proved that the majority of the people did trust the president. They voted for him. I want to just restate that we don't send money to the Taliban. We send money to USAID and charitable organizations, and they use the money to help the people directly. This amendment would make that work, that very important, critical, diplomatic, strategic work, illegal. And then people would die. They would die with that red blood. And with that, I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
That money.
The gentleman has 15 seconds.
15 seconds. That money is being spent right now on the Taliban, and people are dying. Americans don't want this blood on their hands. They don't want to spend their tax money on the Taliban. You had 20 years to defeat the Taliban, and you walked away. I yield.
Yields. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire about the balance of my time?
The gentlelady has a minute 15 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to say how important it is to read bills, and to read amendments. Once again, this amendment removes the president's ability to issue waivers or licenses to allow for humanitarian need. This amendment counters our own interest to prevent humanitarian crises, to assist with detained Americans, and to continue our ongoing work to relocate all of those Afghan allies who worked alongside the United States over the course of our 20-year war in Afghanistan. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields.
I yield.
The gentlewoman yields. The question on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania